Joining us right now to talk more about all of that, the president of the American Enterprise Institute, host of a brand new podcast debuting this week, The Arthur Brooks Show. Arthur Brooks is with us. Arthur, good to see you this morning. Welcome back.
Thank you, Maria. How are you?
I'm great. What's your take on the president's trip? He's made it clear he's tired of subsidizing NATO. Will he be able to move the needle on that subject?
Yeah, he will. I mean, he tends to do his best work when he's overseas. I mean, the way that he expresses himself tends to be the most constructive. So expect the President of the United States to say some things that are relatively conciliatory and that people generally like here in the United States, even a lot of his critics. But what he's basically trying to do is to set the stage to say he's going to be a tough negotiator. The truth of the matter is that the United States has always paid a lot for NATO, has always paid a disproportionate share, but has also had disproportionate influence, and that's been really in our national interest. There's no way the president doesn't understand that, so expect some conciliatory measures over the next couple of days.
Yeah, Blake hit Arthur on some of the key points at the end of his live report there from Brussels, and the president on the South Lawn of the White House this morning. It was interesting to hear him talk not only about NATO, but say that the meeting with Vladimir Putin might be the easiest part of his trip. But when he was asked, friend or foe, Vladimir Putin, he didn't answer. He said competitor. What do you make of that characterization?
Well, it's not wrong. I mean, Vladimir Putin is a competitor. He's a national security competitor. He would like to be an economic competitor. And what he was trying to do was to avoid saying that Vladimir Putin is a foe while just as he's walking into talks with Vladimir Putin. That's basic diplomacy. There's nothing unusual about that, and nobody should get upset about that.
Arthur, the president said this morning on the White House lawn and also in a tweet that the U.S. runs a $150 billion deficit in trade with Europe. That's actually just in goods. If you include our surplus and services, it's $100 billion. But what do you make of this argument that the Europeans treat the United States unfairly on the trade front? A lot of people agree with the president that the Chinese aren't playing a fair game. Is it an accurate criticism of our European allies that they're treating the United States unfairly, too?
And by the way, in my interview last week, the president said the European Union could be sometimes worse than China, is what he said.
He said very often our friends are worse than our
And he said
foes.
Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that that's a relatively specious argument. It's not an argument I think that's really ever held water. Nobody's ripping $150 billion off from the United States. We get goods and services for that. And the truth is that we buy more than we sell to them. But in exchange for that, the European Union is putting in at least $150 billion into the American economy in investments. I mean, it has to counterbalance. And so one of the fastest ways that they could get rid of that trade imbalance is to not let Europeans invest in the American economy. Yeah. And nobody wants that. So I think that that's always been a pretty weak argument. I hope that the president will stop saying that in the coming years. Well,
in terms of this trip, before he headed out to Brussels, he announced his Supreme Court pick last night. Your reaction to the Kavanaugh announcement?
It's a great pick. Kavanaugh is just incredibly well respected. He's smart. He's sophisticated. He's somebody who's well respected by everybody who personally knows him, left, right, and center. Predictably, it's becoming battle lines. It's the kind of this Washington kabuki theater where anybody who's on one side has to say one thing. I found we got a press release from the Women's March today that said that we staunchly oppose candidate XX.
Yeah, we have that press release.
In the name.
Actually, we're going to put that up on screen. It's ridiculous because it said XXX, and then when they found out who the name was, they put it in, but it was so hastily done, they spelt his name wrong.
Yeah. No, and look, if Hillary Clinton were president, I completely believe that conservative activist groups would be doing the same thing. I'm sorry to say it, but it's probably true. That's just the way politics is working. This is power politics, Washington style. Americans should look out for the best Supreme Court justice we can get, and President Trump has made a great pick.
Meanwhile, Arthur, you're launching a new podcast, taking a closer look at the art of disagreement. How did this come about? It's perfect timing. A lot of disagreements happening in the country.
It's true. And one of the things that I've been looking at is that, I think one of the biggest crises that we have in America today is not just political, but the fact that we can't disagree with each other. I found a statistic showing that 20% of Americans have stopped speaking to a close family member or close friend because of politics. And I'm sorry, that's nuts. I grew up in a very progressive family in the most progressive city in America, Seattle, and I tell you, I love them. It's just politics. And by the way, I don't think we should disagree less. I think we we should disagree better. So this podcast, anybody who listens to this will be a better, more persuasive disagreeer and won't lose friends. That's my goal.
So what's your advice? How do you disagree without losing your mind?
How do you disagree without losing your mind?
Yeah.
For one thing, you have to keep in mind the fact that politics isn't everything, that love and relationships are actually more important. We've got to keep our priorities straight. Second, there's some rules of the road. Never treat people with contempt, and anytime somebody treats you with contempt, answer it with warm-heartedness and friendliness. You'll become a better and happier person. And the show is just chock full of these ideas.
Very nice, Arthur. We will be watching your podcast. Arthur Brooks, thank you for joining us this morning, and good luck with it. It sounds like your
Maria.
radio show, by the way, Guy Benson.
Yeah, I love this.
Same thing.